Our 15th episode. And Kelly Ann and I are so excited to be back once again. We're going to talk all about motherhood today. The joys of motherhood, the challenges of motherhood. And I was reaching out to Kelly Ann yesterday, and I said to her, "How long have you been a mother?" And she says, "I'm almost been a mother for 32 years. And I've almost been a mother for 20 years. So as much as we do not claim to know it all, because I don't think we ever do know it all, we definitely have learned a lot, and we've experienced a lot in this role of motherhood. So we're excited for you to join us today. I'm going to let Kelly Ann take off the conversation, but we want to just preface this by saying that even if you are not a mother in the way we see that to be in our world, we really do hope that you will stay for the conversation, because Kelly Ann's going to talk a little bit about the mother archetype in just a moment. And please let us know if you're here live with us. We will engage with you in the chat. We love to see who's here. And if you feel called to share it out, we would love you to do that as well. Good morning, Kelly Ann.
Good morning. I'm out there. Okay.
You finding it?
I had to do this morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us live. Today, as Kim said, we're talking about motherhood. And I just want to share a little bit because I've learned some really interesting things about the female archetypes. And it's been really fascinating to me. And the one thing that I have, the one archetype that really we're talking about today is the mother. There are 4 different archetypes, and gosh, that's a whole other podcast. But the archetype of the mother does not necessarily mean that you have your own children. It is a time in your life where you are in giving mode, where you are building, where you are sustaining, where you are creating. And that could mean with your own children and your own family, but it could mean with your nieces and nephews, with children that that you interact with. It could be that you are that you work with children as a teacher, as a daycare provider, any of those things. Really, what we're talking about is this phase in our life where we are nurturing. We're nurturing the people in our life. And we are in a phase where we are not so much receiving, but we are in an offering stage of our life. Now, I'm kind of getting to the end of that stage because my children are, out of the house and are grown. So I'm really entering into that next phase. But of course, I have just left that mothering phase. And really, as I said, it's a time for bringing forth. It's a time for encouraging, nurturing the people in our lives. And whether you are a mother or not, you may still very well be in that phase of mothering. And that's what we're talking about today.
I love that. And it's important for us to recognize that, because for many reasons, we never know who's listening to this podcast. There's a lot of people that may not choose to have children. There's a lot of people who may not be able to have children. I mean, it looks like so different for all of us. But the fact is, we have these qualities in us to support, to love, to celebrate, to encourage. They're all parts of who we are as mothers, and whatever that looks like. Thank you for everyone who's coming in here. So the reason why this conversation has been a part, Kelly Ann has been a huge source of support for me over the last month or so as I'm navigating some things as being a mother. And it really reminds us all that motherhood is a gift. We celebrate it, especially if we have been able to have our own children and we're fortunate to be there. But we have to remember that we're not born into this world with a rule book or guidelines, right? Like, all of our experiences are different. We all have had our own conditioning, upbringing with our own parents of what we were taught that being a mother is. And we might see, I know I can always think about other people that I grew up with and the types of mothers they had, or the people who cared for them and played that role. Everyone does it so differently. And I think that that's what's really important, is that you get to share those qualities and encourage your children in the ways that you do. But it's a hard job. It's such a hard job. Like our children are almost 20, and my son is 18. And they're now on to that next stage. They're done. Well, my daughter's in university, but my son has done his education at this point in time. Who knows what will happen with him in the future? But there's different responsibilities at all the ages and stages of life. And so you might be listening to this right now, and you might have a little newborn on your breast right now. Who knows, right? But we celebrate you and the role that you're playing, because no matter how old your children are, we're still going to always have that role right through forever, right? We have those memories.
You're right. And it doesn't end. I mean, my children now are 28, 30, and 31. And as they've flown the nest many years ago, they have families of their own. They're building families of their own. I'm a grandmother, but it doesn't change how you feel about your kids. It doesn't change the responsibility that you feel about continuing to guide them. Um, I've had my kids say to me, well, and I had, oh, we were frozen there for a second. I think we're back. I, I have said to my children, even as adults, that if I see you heading in the wrong direction, if I see you doing something that I think is taking you on the wrong path, as a mom, regardless of how old you are, I'm always going to point that out to you, because I think there is never a time where we aren't those guides for our children. Like, I know for me, I still see my mother as a guide for me. I'm really fortunate. My mom and dad are still alive. But they are still guides for me. And I'm, 56 years old. So it never ends. And the worries, as Kim and I have kind of talked about, everybody says this: when your kids are young, you think your worries are big, but they're not. When you worry, I look at my daughter with my granddaughter worrying about, her sleeping routine and going to school and all those things. And I think, oh, those were such simple worries at the time. They didn't feel it, but
Mhm.
the worries just get bigger as the kids get bigger, because now they have adult problems, and that's challenging. So I think as mothers, it's important to have those connections and that support of other mothers, because there's people who have walked through what we may be walking through, and we need their wisdom, we need their guidance.
And we need them to support us without judging us,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Exactly.
honestly, even if you have raised children and it's been all beautiful in the ways, like, this is so important that we are supportive to one another and that we listen, because it's challenging. And we don't want today to be all about, there's a lot of joys of motherhood, let's be real, but it is challenging. And as Kellyanne says, like, those little problems, they're big problems when your children are little. Like, you care about them getting education, you care about them being included at birthday parties, like, you feel the
Mhm.
same feelings. I actually, and again, this is Raw Unscripted, so we let the conversation flow. I was thinking that a lot of the time, the things that we struggled with when we were growing up, we then experience it sometimes through our children. So if our child is not included in something, we feel that same feeling with our child, and we want to support them, and we want them to feel included. So understand that whatever it is you experienced in your childhood, it will sometimes show up with your child, which is why it's so important that we always continue to work on ourselves and be able to be there for our children and encourage them and be a voice. And I want to just speak to, Kellyanne, what you just said about always wanting, if you see your child going down the wrong path, that you're going to speak up about it. Absolutely. But I also think, like, there's a certain point in our children's age, as they get older, as they become adults, even though they are still children in our eyes. They are still technically, they're moving into adulthood where they get to make their own decisions and they get to do what they want to do. And that's a difficult thing because sometimes they might be engaging in things that you wish they weren't doing, or you wish they were seeing things differently. I've had to work a lot on my own values as a parent, as I continue to watch my children grow and watch them navigate things, and being able to step back and say to my, say to my child, I'm here for you. I'm here to support you. What do you need? But then also being willing to step back and let them figure it out on their own, especially as your children are older, where they get to make their own choices. Because I don't know about you, Kellyanne, but I did my fair share of stuff growing up, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is all part of the learning process of our children, but it's hard. It's hard.
It is. And I think you're right, Kim. Like, you obviously can't, you have to allow them to make their choices. You have to allow them to experience the consequences of those choices. And
Mhm.
I think there's a difference between being a guide and maybe challenging some of the things that they're doing or asking questions about them,
Mhm.
but then still allowing them to do it. Like, there have been times where, specifically one of my children, wanted to go halfway around the world with a guy that I didn't know, I knew was not good for her. And I had to let her do that. And I had to let her, even though I challenged her to it, because if you challenge too much, you can push your children away.
Mhm.
So it's that fine line of challenging and guiding, but then allowing them to make their own decisions when they are adults.
Mhm.
And that's hard because, even as the fact that my children are adults now and have adult responsibilities, um, I'm really fortunate that they still come to me and ask for my thoughts. And that's what you want. You want your kids to continue to come. And if you are too overbearing
Mhm.
in how you handle situations, if you push too much, then you risk pushing them away. So it's just such a fine line, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what Karen is saying here too, and that's where I'm at, right? Is
Yep.
like how much of my role is to parent into that's our role, right? We have signed up to be parents. And so my role is not to let you go do whatever it is you want to do. My role is to teach you, to help you make good choices, to help you. This is why we're here. But gosh, is it a fine line, right? It's like, oh, that's where I'm at. I mean, we're respecting our privacy of our children in this conversation, so we're not divulging it all. But we want to be able to make these conversations open and let's talk about them, because there's no worse feeling than feeling alone with something that your child is experiencing or going through, and you're potentially taking some blame on, because we sometimes do that on some level. We blame ourselves, and then you're sitting there with this blame, with this shame, with a child who is maybe struggling on some level, and you're taking that on. It's the last thing we should ever do, is do this. So that's the whole purpose of today's conversation, is to get these conversations out into the open and to talk about them, because nobody doesn't, like, there's not a single parent that doesn't go through a challenge with their child, plain and
No, of
simple.
course not. Of course
Mhm.
not. It's
Mhm.
And some go through more than their fair share, and
Mhm.
that's that's difficult. I mean, my heart goes out to some people who go through, and you're right. We make it about us. We feel that it's our fault. And I think our children are part of our children's role in our life is to help us heal
Mm.
the things that we need to heal in ourselves.
Yeah.
Because the wounds that you have, your children will stir those wounds up, right? And that's what makes us crazy as moms. Like, we're like, because it has even a deeper emotional impact for us when
Mhm.
we and it could be that it's a wound that we had with our own parent. It could be a wound, a childhood wound, could be a wound that we've collected along the way of our life. But really, our children are, um, because they are our flesh and bone. Often, I mean, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they are children that have come to us through a choice that we've made, adoption or step parenting or whatever. But because we have that connection to them, they just seem to kind of dig into our souls somehow.
Mhm.
And I think often the things that are most challenging for us to parent through are sometimes the things that we are carrying either a shame about or a wound about. Um, so it's causing us to not only have to guide and parent them, but to deal with our own pain,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. It's like they're mirroring back what's already in us, and then we feel it, and then we have to explore it. And I always say, like, our children teach us. Like, I really believe it is mutual. Like, we're learning from our children, they're learning from us. And I have learned patience through my children. I have learned to be more open and to really step away from a lot of the things that I believed, this word of should, this is the way things should be done. Um, and I mean, this could be so many things. It could be the way your child chooses to keep their room, and you believe that a room should be kept like this and everything should be in order, but your child wants to be more relaxed, doesn't want to make their bed, they know where everything is. This is just as an example, but you understand, like, we have to really let our children be who they are within reason. I'm not saying let your child like spew their stuff out. I clearly have a son who likes to live like that, which we explored that on the weekend. But yeah, like, our children are there for us to create this openness and to be able to say, like, I'm learning. Like, I say this to my kids all the time. Like, I'm learning and I make mistakes too. And I think that's so important for us to have these conversations with our kids so that they're understanding that we're figuring it out just like they are. And how can we learn how to respect one another, love one another, uh, co-live together, right?
Mhm.
And make things more enjoyable and more loving. Yeah, I don't
I,
know.
I totally agree. I think that whole piece of telling them when you've screwed up and
Mhm.
asking for forgiveness, I was not really good at that for a long time. And when I started um, giving myself some compassion and accepting that this is a hard job, and as you say, like, the models that we've had, many of us carry on, um, and do the things that, I mean, I found myself in the pattern of how my mom parented. And while there were a lot of great things about that, there were a lot of things that I did that I wasn't that I didn't want to parent that way. But when I started, having some compassion for myself and saying, yeah, you're going to mess up,
Mhm.
but when you do mess up, go to your kids and say, I messed up. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have handled that the way I handled it. Um, that creates, I think, so much respect because even people that you work with, even people, your spouse, whatever. When you have the ability to go and to say, "I messed up," and ask for forgiveness, that creates that strengthens the bond
Mhm.
and it strengthens the respect. And I think it then allows, when you do that with your children, it allows them to do that with you, to come to you and say, I messed up,
Mhm.
you know?
This goes back to what we always say. We have to go first. We are the adults here.
Yeah,
Like, if we want our children to be able to learn how to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, do we not have to model that first, right?
of course we do. Of
Oh,
course we
this
do.
is so, so important, right?
Yeah, yeah. and all the things that, and Kim, when you went back to the one thing that, when you talked about challenging your values and things like
Mhm,
that, I believe that your biggest growth comes in challenging your beliefs.
mhm,
And our children require us to do that all the time,
mhm.
right? We have this set belief system. And, I think about when I go back to with my own parents, where I ran into struggles with them, is when I didn't believe what they believed,
Mhm.
when I was starting to question some of those beliefs. And I think that's exactly, what we deal with our own children, is when they are they have a different belief than we do, or they are challenging the beliefs that we have held. And all of a sudden now we are being forced, or I shouldn't say we're being forced to, we are being invited to challenge those beliefs on our own. And because we challenge them and maybe start to look at, okay, maybe my belief is not the truth, or maybe there are other options. It doesn't always have to be this or that,
So true.
right?
Mhm.
Maybe I can kind of open my mind a little bit to some of the things that my children are choosing or doing, and maybe my way hasn't always been the right way.
Yeah.
And as you said, our children teach us. And oh my gosh, the growth. Like, when I think of the growth that I've had over almost 32 years of motherhood, um, yeah, they have taught me so much and have allowed me to expand, really, as you say, my patience, my understanding, my belief system, forgiveness. Like, they're there to make you a better person if you allow them to. Right?
And like it's so true. And listen, of course, there's all this, not all of this applies the same way at different ages of your children. Okay. Like we reckon our kids are older. So I think we're coming from that
Yeah.
angle, right?
Yeah.
But the fact is, like, you can't force someone to believe something. You can't force somebody to act a certain way. So to me, it's like, how can we learn how to respect each other and allow our children to go down a path that they're choosing to go down right now, and let them figure it out. But if we continue to be I'm right, you're wrong, it doesn't work.
No.
Right. And sometimes for me, it's like learning how to understand, like, our children now are growing up in a very, very different world than what we grew up with.
Mhm.
Things are just different now. Parents are parenting their parents are parenting their children differently now. You could have a conversation and this parent over here is okay with underage drinking. This parent over here is okay with letting their teenager have girls spend the night in their beds. Like, I'm hearing it all.
Yeah.
So it's really having conversations with your kids, being able to know, this is what I believe. This is how the rules are in our house. We always say, Marty and I, are, it's like, these are the rules in our home.
Mhm.
And there's certain rules that we're just not going to budge on. Right.
Yeah.
Um, but to me, it's recognizing that the world is different. Social media brings a whole nother angle. The social media influencers, the teenagers, like, people are just living some really crazy lives right now, which cause our children to see things differently.
Right.
Um, which Marty just sent me an article on that, like the generation, this generation right now, I forget what they are, but they are very much learning. Their world is different. I mean, I don't want to speak bad about our kids. Our kids are great kids. Everyone has great kids, but there's just a different level of work ethic. There's a different level of responsibility. This younger generation tends to think that things are going to come to them and that they don't have to go out and seek it. So it brings up a whole bunch of challenges.
Well, and I think because of that, because of all those influences, as parents, we want to be that steady influence. We want to be that North Star. Like, they can have all of these influences in their life, but they always know what to expect at home. Like when you set boundaries, when you say, this is, this is our home and we have certain expectations in our home. And I think we also have, and I guess I've made a lot of mistakes as a parent, but the one thing that I always set the bar high was how my children interacted with me. And, Dr. Phil said so many years ago, and I've used it so many times, you teach people how to treat you. And I have never, that has always stuck with me, that if I want my children to treat me well, and that doesn't mean they haven't yelled, that doesn't mean they haven't, there's lots, but I always expected, the expectation was always that of respect, of mutual respect. And that can be challenging to stick to your guns with that. And that can be, but to me, that is the one thing that I have really always focused on, is that I have set expectations, that this is the way you talk to me. This is the way you behave in my house, our house. And I'm going to try and be understanding about everything else. But there are certain things that are non-negotiables for me.
Yeah. And I saw that earlier in a comment, when there isn't respect coming from your children, and how, setting these boundaries and setting these expectations and reminding our children that I deserve respect, as do you. And, not everybody, let's be real here, not everybody is willing to own their own mistakes. Not everybody thinks before they speak. And not everybody has the emotional intelligence to be able to articulate what it is that I'm feeling. Like we had a big conversation with my son on the weekend, and he was really, really angry. And I said, of course, I'm like, do you want to let your anger out? Of course, I was going into, I had to.
Your coach hat.
Let's talk about that anger. He's like, I don't want to talk about my anger. Right. Yeah. But it's like being able to recognize it's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel mad, like whatever it is. But let's explore how we can navigate those emotions differently, because in the end, I'm your mother, you're my son, you're my daughter, whatever, right? But it is still important that as long as they're under our roof, we do have the ability to expect certain things. Right?
Yeah, we do. We do. And that's, I think if you don't set those expectations, you can have chaos. And I've watched parents who have done that. And unfortunately, those things have to be set when they are little children. And I mean, my daughter now is dealing with that with her daughter, and I'm setting expectations for my granddaughter in my home, and how she, this is, no, you can't talk to me like that. And those are, I believe that children flourish when they do have expetitions. Loving expectations. But I've always said, and as a teacher, I used to always say this to the parents that I dealt with, of the children in my class, is that when you set the bar high, children will rise to meet that. When you set the bar low, children will fall to meet that. So that gets a little more challenging as they get older. But I think it's still something that as young parents, you have to think about.
There's so many good conversations coming in here into the chat. And of course, like this could be a really long conversation, right?
Oh
We know
gosh.
that we're touching on things, but I hear about this a lot. I forget where I saw it in here, but when the parents are no longer together and
Yeah.
the children are living between, like there's co-parenting happening, and we've got one set of rules happening over here. I hear about this with some of the
Well, my
clients.
daughter's going through that. My daughter is a stepmom to 2 kids,
Mhm,
and so
mhm.
I see those dynamics are challenging for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and then it's like, you potentially have one parent, well, and of course, this is often you hear it from the children, right? Like, that's what we have to understand too, is that our children will say, "Well, dad lets me do it this way, and you don't let me." Well, we never know the full truth, right? Like, our kids can know how to play us, right? But
Oh,
the
yeah.
fact is we can have our own different types of discipline, different levels of what's allowed in the home. These all bring up barriers, which in my perfect world, that's why I mean, I'm not divorced or separated, but I mean, this is why the goal obviously is to try and be able to co-parent
Yeah.
as best as we can.
Mhm.
And then another person said that just when there's different rules, it's really
Yeah.
hard when they have a boyfriend or girlfriend's family and their rules are completely opposite in one home than the other. I mean, this is the type of stuff I was talking about earlier about, when they have a girlfriend or a boyfriend and what's allowed in that home versus what's allowed in this home. It just brings up all sorts of things.
Oh, yeah, and your kids will always tell you, "Well, so and so's parents do it this way," or,
Right.
I mean, even when they get married, you get into that where, "Well, this is how so and so's parents, they're really close and they do these kind of things," and it's like, "Well, yeah, but our family's great too." You
Yeah.
know?
You feel like you have to defend yourself, right?
Exactly, that comparison, right? It's tough. It's tough. Yeah.
Yeah. This was
Um,
a good conversation because there's a lot of chat, right?
I
Maybe
know, and
this
it
is
flew
another one
by.
we're gonna have to navigate this one maybe again in
Yeah.
the future. Maybe around Mother's Day potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The moral of the story is may we continue to work on ourselves, heal our own work, where there's needed, where
Mhm.
there's wounds that are still there, where they're pressing up, they're poking into us. Let's continue to do our own work so that we continue to lead first, role model that into our children, be there for our children in whatever ways that needs to look. I think the other thing I just want to share that I didn't get a chance to say is no matter what, we want our children to know that if they're ever in a place of struggle or challenge, that they can call us at whatever time of night that might be, right? Like we don't want to close off those walls.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, there's a mutual person that we have in our lives, Kellyanne and I, that had experiences with with their teenagers and everything that showed up with that. Like it's not easy, but we're all doing the best we can. And today was just about sort of like taking the lid off of that and let's explore that a little bit. And there's a lot of conversation
I
coming
know.
in here. So
The other thing that I just want to leave you with too is if you are a mother, if you are an aunt, whatever you are, celebrate yourself for all the good things that you do. Don't, stand in the gain. Don't stand in the gap. Don't stand in the things that you haven't done right, because you know what? We've all done things wrong as mothers, and that's never going to change. Stand in the things that you've done right and celebrate yourself for all the things you have done right, because believe me, you have done many things right. So just give yourself some grace and some compassion that you're not going to do it perfectly, and that's okay, because that's how our children learn that life isn't perfect, that people aren't perfect, and that's part of just living. So
yeah.
yeah.
So important that because we tended to take it down the hard parts. So we didn't
I
talk about
know.
the joys of motherhood today. But
Yes, yes,
there
yes.
are so many blessings. And listen, we will come in here and take a look at, I hope that if you're listening live with us, that you've taken the time to read some of the comments that are coming in. It really helps bring us together and helps us recognize that we're never alone and that what we might be experiencing, somebody else is too.
Mhm.
This is the purpose of our conversation today in Raw and Unscripted. And we are so thankful that you are here. Maybe what I'll do is, if anybody is not familiar with me, please feel free to follow me on social. My name is Kim Basler. I'm a food freedom and mindset coach, helping women with self-worth, healing their relationships with food, and being able to find self-worth and confidence in their lives today and moving forward. So you can find me through my Instagram page is _Food Freedom, and my website is kimbasler.com. All the things Kim Basler.
And for those who don't know me, I'm Kellyanne Appleton. I'm a mindset and manifestation coach, and I work with women, mostly women over 40, who are ready to stop settling and to create a life that they love through changing their beliefs and unlocking the power that they have to create an amazing life. And you can find me on Instagram, Facebook. Instagram, I am Appleton Kellyanne. Facebook, Kellyanne Appleton. And please, if you're the first time joining us, all of our episodes of Raw Unscripted are on YouTube. And some of them are housed under the live button. Some of them are just housed, I believe it's under the video button, but they're all in there. So, and if this spoke to you, please, if you know somebody who would enjoy these conversations, please share this, because obviously the reason we do this is just to make people understand that they're not alone, and that we all face challenges, and we're here to support each other on the journey.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you for commenting, supporting one another. And we will see you next Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. Eastern, for our next conversation. Have a great day. See you soon.
Everybody.